Just before the video starts, I wanted to quickly express my awareness of obviously what is going on in the Ukraine at the moment. It's truly heartbreaking that millions of people have lost their home, have lost their country, have lost family members, and have nowhere to go. If you want to help, the fastest and most effective way is to donate money. I have listed a few legitimate charities below. I've personally chosen the DEC to donate to because they were suggested by the gov.uk website and The Guardian. I also want to acknowledge that there are horrible things happening all around the world all the time, and sometimes when we are so far removed from those countries, the only way that we can help is by donating money. If you wish to donate, I will leave the links below.
Hello, I'm Isabella. If you're anything like me, you might have watched things like The Social Dilemma or The Great Hack, and you're very much aware of how detrimental our devices and social media can be. But if you're also anything like me, you still continue to use your phone and social media every day, and you continue to get swept away by the never-ending feed and the addictive nature of our devices, even though you know it's bad for you. And if you're also anything like me, you've probably tried some tips and tricks to help decrease your screen time, and maybe they have helped a little bit, but you still find yourself mindlessly scrolling from time to time, and you know you can do better. That's pretty much been my experience. So I decided to do a 30-day no social media challenge, or a detox if you will, to see what might happen to my device habits and maybe my productivity and maybe the way that I think and feel about myself and in general. But before I talk about what happened as a result of doing that, I want to talk a little bit about whether or not we are addicted to our phones. So I already know that I don't use my phone as much as many people in my age bracket who have access to a smartphone and the internet. But I still believe that I am addicted to my phone. And it surprises me when people claim that they are not. My reasoning for this is kind of gonna unfold in this video. So to get an idea of people's thoughts towards this, I did a poll on YouTube asking, thinking about your phone and social media usage, would you say that you're addicted? Bear in mind this poll doesn't accurately represent the general public. The participants are subscribers of my channel, the majority of which are female and between the ages of 18 to 35. Of the 3,200 people that voted, 16% of you believe that you are not addicted to your phone or social media. And I'm going to challenge that because I think that more of us are addicted than care to admit or even realize. And yes, many of the people in that 16% may actually not be addicted and they have voted accurately. There are people that genuinely don't use their phones that much. But it seemed from the comments on this poll that many people thought the word addicted was too strong of a word to use. Many people said it's more of a dependency than an addiction. For example, our phone is the only way to communicate in long distance relationships or friendships, for example, so we might be on our phone a lot for that reason, which is true. Phones have actual uses. We can depend on them for things like work, education, navigation, general tasks, and contacting people. But what I'm talking about is the subconscious habits we have formed with our devices. And I'm not going to go too much into detail about this simply because there's so many videos on this topic. I think most of us are very aware already of how unhealthy social media and our devices can be, not only because of the content that we might be consuming, but because of the addictive nature of phones and the apps themselves that have been designed to be addictive. If for some reason this is completely new to you, I'd recommend watching The Social Dilemma on Netflix. There's also The Great Hack, that's also on Netflix. The Instagram Effect on BBC iPlayer in the UK. There are tons of videos on YouTube. Also interviews with people who were involved in the early creation of these big social media apps. I will list a bunch below that I have found extremely eye-opening. But is the word addicted or addiction too strong of a word to use. So I spoke to my dad, who is an addictions counsellor and psychotherapist accredited by the BACP, to get a better idea of what addiction is and what it means to be addicted to your phone. So I'm just going to share the recordings of this. It was recorded in a park. I'm sorry that the audio isn't that great, but I think a lot of what my dad had to say was really interesting. There's no footage for this, but it'll be an interesting listen.
How would you define addiction?
There's what we would call ingested addictions, i.e. drugs, alcohol, heroin, pills, smoking, cigarettes, and then we have what's called process addictions or behavioural addictions, things like gaming, gambling, sets, internet, shopping. Some people's idea of what addiction is something when you have an inability to stop doing the behaviour. There are other names of it which some people would prefer to call it because they don't like to admit that they are addicts, so they may say that they have a compulsivity to do something, even dependency, but obviously dependency is just another word for addiction really. Probably if you looked or googled up definition of addiction, you'd come up with a lot of different answers to it, but I would probably say generally that it's an inability to stop doing something even when you want to stop doing it.
Do you think addiction is the right word to use when talking about phone use?
Well, I know some people wouldn't like to say that, but that's probably because they don't want to admit that they have a problem in the first place. Because I think the stigma about the word addiction is that it's something that you can't control and therefore it's out of your own will, and no one really likes to admit to that. And it can be used a bit loosely as well. Yeah, I'm addicted to my phone, so what? Because so what? It's only a phone. I mean, everyone seems to be dependent on the phone. I mean, if they walk out without it, they go back for it. There's lots of reasons, I guess, for that as well. But I think there is a dependency on a phone, but I guess that doesn't necessarily mean you're addicted to the use of it. It just means that you might need it. I think it's generally when there are consequences for your actions that people then start to do something about it. There may be not as bad consequences as perhaps someone might have if they have an alcohol or drug problem, because they're not so immediate. But long term, there would be possibly a lot more consequences, i.e. mental health, depression, anxiety, and perhaps the nature of exactly what they are watching on those particular media outlets could be a cause of their mental health issues.
Do you think more people are addicted to their phones than people admit to?
Yeah, definitely. People don't like to admit that they are addicted, so they're unlikely to actually admit that they are. And therefore, if they're not admitting to it, they're less likely to do something about it.
So I think I'm addicted to my phone simply because of how I often pick it up multiple times a day without any real reason to.
Yeah.
And I always see this as sort of like a neurological, if that's the right word, habit. How would you define the difference between a habit and an addiction?
When you say a habit, it's quite interesting because when people are addicted to heroin, people say that they'll say themselves, I've got a habit, or he's got a habit with his heroin addiction. It's called a habit. But if you habitually walk to the park, it's not necessarily a problem. But if you habitually use your phone, and as a result of using the phone, in other words, there's consequences of using it, then it becomes an issue. If you're using your phone all the time and as a result of it, you're tired, you're discontent, you might be irritable, don't meet your friends on time because you're still on the phone.
Or mental health issues or
those kind of things. So, and I think maybe it's a phone and it's social media. And so you can't see the consequences so quickly. If you smoke one cigarette, it's probably not going to do you much harm. But it's only 20 years later that you die of your cigarette addiction because you get cancer, for example. So maybe we don't know what the end result of 25, 30 years of social media use would be.
So it seems that although addiction is quite a heavy word, it is a valid description of the behaviour that many of us have with our phones. In the same poll, 45% of people said that they are addicted to their phone, but not social media, which was almost half of the people that voted. That's interesting because it goes to show that our phones themselves are sometimes more of the problem. So here's what my dad had to say on that.
So that's nearly half of the people said They're addicted to their phone, but not to social media.
Yeah, which is interesting because addicted to the phone could already be social media, because what are they're not going to be addicted to just picking up their phone to make a phone call, but it's what's on the phone that they're addicted to. So there's so much on a phone these days,
or like music or podcasts.
Exactly. So, and as you said earlier, you know, sometimes people they just pick their phone up and it's so automatic, it's habitual. They pick it up and they start scrolling through. And they don't really know what they're looking for. It's almost like a pastime, or because they're bored, or it's just. And I think sometimes I notice some people do it as a kind of it's a prop. So if they're on their own and they're maybe a bit self-conscious and they're standing waiting for someone, then they may pick up their phone as a kind of to look at their phone so they're not standing there aimlessly. And I think some people do that.
I see it as a self-soother. It's just like a comforting thing.
Yeah, and I think people divert to their phone so that they don't have to face the reality of something that actually years ago you wouldn't have had the phone in the first place when you were walking along, because no one had them. They are used as a kind of almost a defence mechanism. If you observe people how they use their phones, not for what they're using them for, but for how they're using them, it's probably two different things.
So I feel like I knew this, but I never really took the time to think about it more deeply. That our relationship with our phones is more than just a habitual dopamine release, but it's also a crutch that we use when we're anxious or self-conscious or bored or just in an awkward moment. The act of being on your phone gives you an action. It gives you the status of I'm doing something. It's a way of escaping what's immediately around you so that you don't have to interact with it or deal with it, which is great for people that are introverted. But what if you didn't have that crutch? Would you just literally sit there and stare into nothing during those mundane or awkward times that you would normally use your phone to distract yourself? And sure, some people carry a book, or they listen to music, or write in a journal so that they have something to do during these times of nothing where we would normally pick up our phone. Or maybe without anything to do, we would learn to communicate more, and maybe we'd start conversation with people and look into people's eyes a bit more, and maybe make a friend or just take in our surroundings. And this isn't really anything new. This was only 20 years ago that people didn't have their phones to go on as a crutch. So they would just deal with what's around them, or just go off into a daydream, or I don't know, do something else. But I feel like we've forgotten how to do those things, how to just be okay with ourselves with nothing to hold on to. Our phones are like an extension of ourselves. We feel anxious when we don't know where our phone is. It's always on us, it's always in close proximity. Even if I'm out and about and I don't have my phone on me, I feel really weird, and I don't want to have to feel that way. But it's also because but if like an emergency happens, or I get locked out of the house, I might need to call someone. If something really cool happens, I might want to take a video of it. Like, I might need it. I just want to have to not need it. I don't know. Anyway, this video is a little bit all over the place. I just wanted to make sure I added in that interview that I had with my dad because it was really relevant to the topic that I'm talking about. So this brings us to part 2 of this video, the 30-day no social media detox. So if you want to see what happened as a result of those 30 days without social media, check out the next video in part 2, which I will leave right here. Ow!